Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through a pair of creaky swinging doors, the kind that slap shut behind you with a dusty sigh. The lamps flicker amber, the air tastes like smoke and whiskey, and somewhere in the corner, a player piano stumbles through a tune that no one's really listening to. You pull your hat lower, the boards groan beneath your boots, and the room smells like bacon, beans, maybe something fried in last week's grace. Welcome to the saloon, the beating, belching heart of the Wild West. You probably won't survive this. Between the heat, the questionable meat, and whatever's floating in that drink, you'd be lucky to make it through a single supper without stomach regret. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing those dots light up all over the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push deeper into the saloon, and it feels like you've stepped inside a pot of stew left to simmer since sunrise. The air is thick, spiced with tobacco, sour beer, and something frying in the back that could be pork, or could be something else entirely. A man at the bar slaps a card down and laughs. Another snores face, first in his beans. And through the haze, you realize this isn't just where people drank. It's where they ate, talked, gambled, fought, fell in love, and occasionally ducked flying furniture. The saloon was the social hub of nearly every Western town. Not the church, not the schoolhouse. Those came later, if at all. Here a man could spend his day's pay on a shot of whiskey and a plate of food that might, if you squinted, resemble dinner. Meals weren't about flavor, they were about survival and speed. The truth is, most saloon owners weren't chefs. They were entrepreneurs with a barrel of liquor and a dream. Food was an afterthought, a way to keep customers upright long enough to buy more drinks. But when the stomachs of cowboys, miners, and drifters started to rumble, the kitchens came alive. Iron pans hissed, fat sizzled. Someone shouted for more wood for the stove. Someone else shouted because they'd burned their fingers. You drift toward the smell. It's equal parts comforting and suspicious. A cook wipes his hands on a dirty apron and tosses you a grin. You eat what's served, he says, or you don't eat. And that's how dinner began. Historians still argue whether saloons truly represented the heart of Western towns, or were just their noisy appendages. Attached, but not essential. But one thing's certain, they fed people. In places where supply wagons arrived late, or sometimes not at all. The saloon became the one spot where you could get something hot, something heavy, and something resembling meat. Imagine sitting down at a rough wooden table, scarred by years of knives and spilled whiskey. A tin plate clatters in front of you. On it a heap of beans, a strip or two of bacon, and a biscuit so hard it could probably stop a bullet. It's not fancy, but it fills you. There's no menu. There's no choice. You eat what's available, what came in on the last freight wagon, or what the local hunter brought in that morning. Maybe beef if you're lucky, maybe rabbit. Maybe something that used to hiss before it hit the pan. Still, food in these places had a strange sort of charm. It was communal. Strangers shared tables. Forks were optional. Conversations were short, because chewing took concentration. The lighting was dim enough to make even the worst stew look inviting. And oh, that stew. We'll get to that bubbling mystery in a bit. You hear a bottle pop somewhere behind the bar. The sound's crisp, sharp, like a punctuation mark in the lazy hum of the room. A bartender pours out something brown and calls it whiskey. You're not sure it's whiskey. You're not sure it's legal. But it's what's served. The floorboards are sticky beneath your boots. Someone spills their drink. Someone laughs. You think about how every Western movie skips this part. The smells, the noise, the constant low buzz of flies. But this, right here, is the real West, not the gunfights, not the gold rush, but this tired, hungry hum of people just trying to fill their stomachs before another long, hard day. Mainstream historical fact. Most saloons did serve food, even if we tend to picture them as drinking dens. In boomtowns like Deadwood or Dodge City, meals were advertised alongside whiskey shots and card games. Hot meals served daily wasn't a luxury. It was survival bait for hungry customers. A man with a full belly could gamble longer and drink more. And the food came cheap. A plate of beans and bacon might run you 25 cents. A small fortune to a ranch hand, but worth it after weeks on the trail. Some saloons offered free lunch with whiskey, but only to lure you into buying more of the good stuffs, and by good, I mean barely drinkable, the quirky tidbit. Some saloons served oysters, real oysters, in the middle of dusty, landlocked towns hundreds of miles from the nearest coast. Freight trains and ice deliveries made it barely possible, though the results were questionable. Prairie oysters, of course, were something else entirely, and not from the sea. But hey, protein is protein. Imagine the scene: a group of miners, dust, covered and exhausted, staring down a plate of grey, rubbery shellfish in a town that barely had clean water. You'd eat it anyway, out of curiosity, or pride, or pure hunger. That's the Wild West for you. Equal parts bravery and poor decisions. As you sit there, spooning beans and pretending they're better than they are, the piano wheezes through another song. The cook bangs a pan against the wall, shouting for someone to fetch more wood. You realize this isn't just dinner, it's theater. Every sound, every smell, every shout adds to the performance of the saloon. Even the flies play their part, circling lazily in the lamplight, dipping low over the stew pot. You glance around. The room's a patchwork of humanity. Cowboys, gamblers, soldiers on leave, a preacher pretending he's just passing through. Everyone's tired. Everyone's hungry. And for a few minutes, the endless dust and danger outside don't exist. There's only the meal in front of you, the clink of tin cups, and the murmur of half-asleep voices. You take another bite and wince. Too much salt. Always too much salt. But that's the West. It's preserved in salt and smoke, and the stubborn will to keep chewing. Historians still argue whether the saloon diet helped or harmed frontier health. Some say those salt-heavy, fat-rich meals kept cowboys alive in harsh conditions. Others argue it was a slow march toward heart failure, one biscuit at a time. Either way, people didn't live long enough for cholesterol to be their biggest concern. You lean back in your chair, watching the lamplight flicker off the bottles lined along the bar. The cook starts humming to himself as he scrapes a blackened pan clean. The piano falters, then stops. The sound that fills the room now is quieter. Just the low murmur of tired voices, the scrape of chairs, the hiss of the stove cooling. There's something hypnotic about it. The rhythm of survival. Eat, drink, laugh if you can. Then wake up tomorrow and do it again. By the time you push away your plate, the night outside feels heavier, the stars sharper. You step out into the dry wind, belly full, boots crunching on hard dirt. The saloon doors creak behind you, whispering shut. Somewhere down the street, a coyote howls. You wipe your hands on your jeans and smile. It wasn't fancy, but it was food. And in the Wild West, that was enough. Tomorrow, you'll wake to beans and bacon again. Or maybe just coffee and a hangover. But tonight, you had warmth, and you had company. And that's more than most travelers could count on out here. The lanterns flicker out one by one behind the windows, and the desert wind carries the last scent of fried bacon into the dark. You breathe it in and start walking. The night hums around you, like the world itself exhaling after a long day. The next morning smells like smoke, coffee, and the faint regret of bad whiskey. You blink against the pale light, creeping through the saloon shutters. Dust dances in the beams like lazy snow, and somewhere, a rooster has the nerve to sound hopeful. You're not ready for it. The cook's already awake. He never really slept. His fire's been burning since before dawn, his sleeves rolled up, his hands black with soot. You hear the crackle of bacon fat, the rhythmic clatter of tin plates, the low mumble of a man too tired to cuss. Beans, bacon, and biscuits. The holy trinity of cowboy cuisine. Simple, salty, eternal. You shuffle closer to the stove, drawn like a moth to that sizzling pan. The air smells like burnt coffee grounds and salvation. Out here, breakfast isn't about pleasure, it's about continuing to exist. Beans first. Always beans. Dried pinto or navy beans. Shipped in bulk and soaked overnight, if the cook remembered. They were easy to store, easy to carry, and packed with just enough protein to keep a man upright through 12 hours of saddle sweat. The trick, of course, was keeping them edible. Cowboys boiled them in iron pots blackened by 100 campfires, stirring with whatever stick was nearest. A dash of salt, maybe a chunk of bacon if someone was feeling generous, and sometimes, if luck smiled, a spoonful of molasses or coffee grounds for flavor. You probably wouldn't taste the difference, but it looked darker, richer, and that counted for something. You grab a tin cup and blow on the rising steam. It smells faintly of dirt, but warm dirt, the comforting kind. The kind that says, "You've made it through another night." Historians still argue whether beans were truly the most common cowboy food or just the most romanticized. Some claim the idea of a bean diet was exaggerated by dime novels and movie scripts. Others point to supply records from army outposts and cattle drives that show beans as practically a currency. Either way, you're staring at the real deal now. A bowl that's more history than flavor. Next comes bacon. Not the kind that curls and crackles perfectly on a Sunday brunch plate. No, this is slab bacon, salted, smoked, and harder than saddle leather. The kind that lasts for months without refrigeration, because no one had invented refrigerators yet. Cowboys sliced it thick and fried it in its own grace until the edges turned black and the air smelled like home, or something close enough. You chew slowly. The taste is equal parts smoke and salt, your tongue tingling with the kind of flavor that suggests it's been alive since last winter. But out here, that's luxury. Bacon meant fat, and fat meant strength. And then there were the biscuits. You hear the cook grumble as he drops dough onto a scorched pan, the dough refusing to behave. There's no yeast, no butter, no mercy. Just flour, water, maybe lard if the saloon could spare it. The result? Hard biscuits so tough you could use them as weapons. Some cowboys called them Sooners, because you'd sooner break a tooth than chew one. The cook slides you a biscuit the size of your palm, edges cracked and dusted with ash. You bite down, and for a moment you're not sure whether to swallow or apologize. The texture's something between sandstone and determination. But it's warm, and that's enough. A fly buzzes near your ear, persistent as hunger. The piano player's asleep on his stool. The bartender, still in last night's shirt, yawns so wide you think his jaw might fall off. The morning crowd filters in. Miners, drovers, gamblers nursing bad luck. They slump at tables, order plates without looking, and stare into their coffee like it might reveal the meaning of life. That coffee, by the way, could strip paint. The beans, if they were beans, had been boiled 3 times, strained through a sock, and mixed with grounds from yesterday's pot. Frontier coffee wasn't brewed so much as punished into existence. Still, it was hot and bitter, and it woke the dead, or at least the half, dead sitting around you. The cook keeps ladling beans into bowls, bacon onto plates. He hums tunelessly, the same melody as yesterday. Maybe the same one he's hummed every morning for years. You take another bite and decide that, somehow, it's getting better. Maybe your taste buds have given up. Maybe this is what acceptance tastes like. A mainstream historical fact: beans, bacon, and biscuits really were the backbone of the cowboy diet. During long cattle drives, chuck wagons carried barrels of dried beans and salt pork. Flour was measured in pounds, not cups. Cooks, called koozies, or belly cheaters, fed dozens of men 3 times a day with just fire, iron pots, and hope. The chuck wagon, invented by Charles Goodnight around 1866, changed everything. It was part pantry, part kitchen, part miracle on wheels. Its wooden boxes held everything from coffee tins to rolling pins. When the wagon stopped, the cook set up camp and worked like a one-man army. Dinner could be ready in 30 minutes, assuming nothing exploded. And here's your quirky tidbit: those biscuits. Some were made not just for eating, but for gambling. Cowboys used leftover biscuits as makeshift poker chips. A man could lose his breakfast before he even ate it. Talk about high stakes. There's also a tale about a traveling preacher who blessed a batch of biscuits at a saloon breakfast, only for them to bounce off the stove and shatter a window. Divine intervention, perhaps, or just overbaked faith. You sip your coffee and lean back in your chair. The room's brighter now, sunlight cutting across the floorboards. The air's still thick with bacon grease and stale beer, but there's something oddly peaceful about it. You start to understand why these rough men, these wandering souls, clung to this morning ritual. A meal meant stability, however brief. It meant warmth, conversation, routine. The kind of things you don't take for granted when the world around you is half dust, half danger. You look around at the faces, lined, tired, unshaven, and you realize they're not just eating, they're remembering. Remembering home, or the idea of it. Remembering mothers who baked bread, wives who boiled stew, children who laughed at the dinner table. Out here, food wasn't just fuel, it was memory, disguised as beans and grease. Someone breaks the silence by whistling a few bars of a tune. Someone else chuckles, shaking his head. Same breakfast, different day, he says. And he's right. But there's comfort in repetition. You finish your plate, the beans gone cold, the bacon reduced to crumbs. The biscuit's still half there, but you decide to let it win this round. You push the plate away, wipe your mouth on your sleeve, and watch the cook pour the last of the coffee into a cracked mug. Lunch'll be the same, he mutters. Dinner too. You nod. You're not disappointed. Somehow, you're even grateful. Because in this dusty corner of the world, sameness is safety. Predictability is peace. Outside, the sun's climbing higher, the sky a pale blue stretched thin by heat. The day will be long, the trail endless, the work brutal. But for now, you're full. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of cowboy food reflected resilience or just necessity. Maybe it was both. Maybe it taught them how to appreciate life's plainest things. Beans that stayed firm through hardship, bacon that refused to rot, biscuits that could double as paperweights. Whatever it was, it kept them alive. And you, sitting here, realize that's no small feat. Because survival, out here, tastes exactly like this: salty, smoky, slightly burnt, and strangely comforting. You stand, stretch, and brush crumbs from your hands. The cook gives you a nod, then turns back to his fire. Outside, the wind picks up, swirling dust into lazy spirals. The day's begun, same as every day before it, and the promise of beans and bacon waits at its end like a reward for endurance. You tip your hat to no one in particular, step into the glare, and walk toward whatever the desert decides to serve next. The afternoon heat hits you like a punch when you step outside. The sky's too wide, the sun's too mean, and the world hums in that dry, shimmering way that makes even lizards look tired. You walk slow, boots dragging through the dust, hat low enough to shade your eyes but not your thoughts. By now, The town's waking up again. The clang of hammers, the distant shout from the blacksmith, the rattle of wagon wheels. Somewhere, a dog barks without enthusiasm. And you know where everyone's heading sooner or later. Back to the saloon. Not for lunch. No one calls it that out here. But for another round of liquid courage and something hot to chew on. This time, though, you notice something different. The smell of coffee lingers in the doorway, rich and earthy, tangled with the sharper scent of alcohol. You realize the two have become inseparable, morning, noon, or night. The cowboys' twin elixirs of survival. Whiskey for breakfast, coffee for survival. You duck back under the swinging doors and find your same seat waiting. Like the chair knows you're too tired to argue. The bartender nods, a man who's seen more sunrises than smiles. He pours without asking. A shot glass, a tin cup, and one truth. Both drinks come from the same bottle of grit. Coffee first. Because it's the safer bet. The cook's back at it, stirring a pot so black it looks like melted midnight. The smell's familiar now. Burnt, bitter, comforting. You watch as he scoops it out with a ladle and pours it into mugs that have seen better centuries. Frontier coffee wasn't about taste. It was about heat. About the ritual of starting your day with something that reminded you were still alive. Cowboys didn't have fancy roasts or sugar packets. They had ground beans, a fire, and patience. 3 things rarely found in one man. You take a sip and feel it burn its way down, a line of warmth carving through the dust inside you. It's awful. And perfect. Historians still argue whether the coffee craze of the West came from necessity or nostalgia. Soldiers had drunk it during the Civil War, and when they wandered west afterward, they brought the habit with them. It was easy to pack, easy to make, and, compared to whiskey, it didn't get you shot. Usually, whiskey, on the other hand, was an entirely different beast. The bottle behind the bar isn't labeled. None of them are. But the barkeep knows which is which. He pours an amber shot that catches the sunlight like liquid fire. It smells sharp, medicinal, and faintly like something that could take paint off a fence. They called it Rede, coffin varnish, or, if you wanted to sound polite, just the usual. Most of it wasn't whiskey at all. It was grain alcohol mixed with burnt sugar, chewing tobacco juice, or kerosene for kick. Some had snake heads steeped in the barrel for flavor. Or superstition. You raise the glass. You know this is a bad idea. You drink anyway. Your throat goes numb first. Then your thoughts. Then, mercifully, your taste buds surrender. It's not pleasant, but it does the job. Out here, no one drinks for pleasure. They drink to forget how much everything else hurts. You glance around the room. A pair of cowhands are arguing over a poker hand that's gone sideways. A prospector counts out coins with shaking fingers. A woman in a faded red dress hums under her breath, polishing glasses that will never truly shine. The piano wakes up again, one key stubbornly off. The rhythm's lazy, the kind that makes you tap your boot without meaning to. Someone shouts, "Coffee, strong as sin," and the cook just grins. That's the only kind he knows how to make. A mainstream, historical fact coffee, and whiskey really did define frontier life. In many remote settlements, water wasn't safe to drink, stagnant, muddy, or worse. Boiling it into coffee or drowning it in alcohol made it survivable. For some cowboys, it was the only thing between them and dysentery, or sobriety, which they considered just as dangerous. Soldiers, miners, even preachers relied on it. A good pot of coffee could calm a camp faster than a sermon. It became a kind of social glue, passed around the fire, sipped at dawn, shared between enemies who'd stopped fighting long enough to warm their hands. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some saloons offered coffee whiskey in the mornings, a dubious mix brewed overnight in the same pot. It saved time, cups, and possibly lives, depending on which you drank more of. There are accounts of barkeeps pouring leftover coffee into whiskey barrels to stretch the supply, calling it breakfast blend. Another tale tells of a traveling salesman who sold instant cowboy coffee, tiny pressed cubes that dissolved in hot water. The only problem: they were made of charred molasses, sawdust, and mystery grit. He sold out anyway. You take another sip of your tin cup brew, Grimace, then laugh softly. The barkeep raises an eyebrow. Tastes like dirt, you say. Good, he replies. Means it's real. You both chuckle. The kind of small, shared joke that makes the day just a little easier to carry. Outside, the wind rattles the sign above the door. You think about how strange it is that both coffee and whiskey, one to wake you, one to dull you, were lifelines out here, opposite ends of the same rope, pulling you through another sunburned day. The room quiets a little as the heat presses against the windows. The piano fades, the voices soften. A miner snores softly against his arm. You rest your chin in your hand, tracing the grooves in the table, wondering how many elbows have leaned here before yours. Maybe hundreds. Maybe thousands. You imagine the conversations that happened here. Dreams traded for dollars, lies told with smiles, toasts made to people who never came back. The air is thick with history, the kind you can't find in books because no one wrote it down. Just men and women, scraping through, one cup at a time. Historians still argue whether the saloon was a poison or a refuge, whether whiskey ruined the frontier or simply reflected it. Maybe it was both. Maybe it gave courage to men who had none left, and comfort to women who had too much to bear. You swirl the last of your drink, the bottom glowing gold in the dim light. There's something almost sacred about it, a communion of survival, shared across a bar that's seen too many ghosts. You lift your glass toward the cook, who nods without looking up. Here's to the living, you say softly. He grunts, then flips a strip of bacon with the reverence of a priest. The sun's dropping low now, bleeding across the horizon in streaks of red and copper. The saloon fills with long shadows, stretching like tired thoughts. Someone lights the lamps, the air turning amber again. You sit back, full of smoke and stories, and realize you've spent the whole day here without meaning to. It's easy to do. Time slows inside these walls. The world outside might be harsh, but here, between whiskey and coffee, beans and biscuits, you find something steady. Something human. You take one last swallow of the bitter brew and sigh. Your tongue might never forgive you, but your heart feels lighter. Tomorrow, the coffee will taste the same. The whiskey too. The days blend together like old grounds in the pot. But for now, as the piano drifts back to life, and the night wind creeps through the cracks, you feel a little more alive than you did this morning. A little more awake. A little more settled. The next time you wander back into the saloon, the air feels heavier, thicker, like it's been simmering all day in its own secrets. You hear the faint clatter of spoons against tin, the kind of sound that only means one thing: supper. The cook's back there again, sleeves rolled up, ladle in hand, standing over a pot that's been bubbling since before sunrise. The smell hits you halfway across the room. Something rich, smoky, and suspicious. You can't quite tell what's in it. You don't ask. He gives you a grin that says, "Trust me." You don't. But you sit down anyway. This is the infamous stew of mystery origins. A dish so legendary that even the most hardened cowboy approached it with cautious reverence. It could be rabbit, beef mule, or yesterday's leftovers stretched with a splash of whiskey and hope. Out here, mystery wasn't a flavor, it was a way of life. You glance at the pot. It's thick, dark, and bubbling like a tar pit. The cook tosses in a handful of something, maybe onions, maybe not. A few herbs follow, if you can call wild sage an herb. Slumgullion, he says, with a smirk. That's the word. It rolls off the tongue, like a curse and smells like survival. Slumgullion was the cowboy's stew of everything. A bit of salt pork, a stray carrot, some beans, a scrap of last week's steak. Nothing wasted, nothing identified. You take your spoon, dip it in, and let the heat hit your face. The taste, surprisingly decent, salty, smoky, vaguely meaty. It's the kind of meal that fills your stomach and asks no questions. The cook leans against the counter, watching your expression. "You can't make it twice the same way," he says proudly. That's what makes it good. You can't argue with that. Historians still argue whether Slumgullion came from the gold rush camps or the cattle drives. Some say miners invented it, scraping the bottom of stew pots to make slum, a slurry of leftovers thickened with flour. Others insist it was a chuck wagon creation, born of necessity and a total disregard for culinary law. Either way, it stuck. By the 1870s, the word appeared in diaries, recipe notes, even newspaper jokes. Nothing fills a man's belly like a bowl of slumgullion. One prospector wrote, and nothing empties it faster. You take another spoonful and discover a surprise chunk, something chewy, possibly beef, possibly shoe leather. You decide not to analyze it too closely. The cook chuckles. "That piece there's from yesterday's roast," he says. "Or the day before. Hard to say. You travelers, you don't keep track of time too good." He's not wrong. Out here, the days blur like the stew. Thick, brown, and indistinguishable. You glance around the room. Every table holds the same bowl, every face the same resigned acceptance. People eat in silence, heads bent, spoons scraping rhythmically. The sound becomes almost meditative, like rain on a roof. You realize something strange, it's peaceful. Mainstream historical fact. Yes, they really did eat like this. Most saloon kitchens had one main dish per day's stew. It was cheap, easy to keep hot, and forgiving of questionable ingredients. Meats were salted, sometimes dried, sometimes barely identified. A bit of flour turned thin broth into something hearty, and nobody complained if it wasn't gourmet. Many travelers described saloon stew as a meal and a gamble. You paid for the privilege of mystery, and somehow, people kept coming back. Here's your quirky tidbit: in some frontier towns, stew wasn't just food. It was currency. Patrons who couldn't pay for their drinks could work off their debt by adding to the pot. That might mean tossing in a scrap of meat, a potato, or, occasionally, something unidentifiable that you'd rather not dwell on. One 1880s story from Tombstone tells of a miner who contributed his leftover rattlesnake tail. The cook shrugged, chopped it up, and the customers ate without complaint. "Tasted like chicken," they said. Of course it did. Everything that couldn't be identified always tasted like chicken. You lean back, letting the stew settle in your stomach. It's heavy, but warm. And there's something oddly satisfying about that weight. It feels like safety. A full belly in a world where hunger lurked behind every dust storm. The bartender wipes down the counter, humming softly. The piano player snores in the corner again, his hat tipped over his face. Someone laughs, too loud. Maybe from whiskey, maybe from the simple joy of being alive another day. It hits you that this, right here, is what the West actually was. Not gunfights or gold strikes, but tired people sharing whatever food they could muster. Not glorious, not clean, but deeply, stubbornly human. Historians still argue whether saloon stews were more dangerous than nutritious. Food poisoning wasn't rare, especially in the summer heat. Some towns had epidemics traced back to bad meat from saloon kitchens. But most of the time, the sheer salt content preserved everything long enough to fool the nose and stomach alike. You look into your bowl again. The liquid's thickened into something close to glue. The beans cling to the spoon, the meat resists explanation. But it's strangely comforting to know you're eating the same sort of meal that once kept thousands of travelers going. It's like time travel through your taste buds, just rougher. You catch the cook muttering to himself as he scrapes the pot. He's talking about tomorrow's stew already, how he'll stretch what's left with a bit of cornmeal and bacon grease. Keeps the edges from burning, he says, and fills the gaps in your soul. You believe him. The fire pops, a lazy spark drifting into the smoky air. You can almost hear the desert outside breathing, the wind pressing against the windows like a restless spirit. The night's close, warm, and humming with the quiet patience of a world too vast to care what's in your bowl. You spoon up the last bit and smile faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a harmonica starts playing, soft, off, key perfect. The music seeps into the edges of your mind, turning the room into something hazy and dreamlike. The cook pours himself a cup of coffee, sits across from you and shrugs. Not bad. Huh. You nod. Could use more salt. He laughs, a sound like gravel sliding down a hill. That's what everyone says, even when I'm right. You sit there in silence for a while. The kind that only happens between people who've both accepted the same absurd truth, that this stew, ridiculous as it is, might be the most honest meal you'll ever have. The last light fades, leaving the saloon aglow with lanterns and low laughter. Someone tells a joke about beans. Someone else claims to have seen a ghost near the water trough. The stew pot keeps bubbling, quietly, endlessly, as if it's listening. You close your eyes for a moment, the warmth of the meal settling into something like peace. You think maybe, just maybe, the mystery isn't meant to be solved. Maybe it's meant to be shared. And when you finally stand to leave, you feel heavier, slower, more grounded, because out here, in the Wild West, the line between survival and comfort is one spoonful of slumgullion thick. The stew lingers in your belly like a story that hasn't finished telling itself. You step back out into the night air, the wooden porch creaking beneath your boots. The sky stretches overhead, black and velvet, pricked with stars so bright they look almost painted. Somewhere out there, coyotes are harmonizing about hunger, and the dry wind smells faintly of mesquite smoke and regret. Behind you, the saloon door flaps lazily, the faint rattle of a piano chord escaping before the night swallows it whole. Your breath fogs a little in the cool air. You're full, but curious. The stew was one kind of Wild West mystery, sure, but your stomach and your imagination aren't done exploring the menu. You start to wonder what else those dusty saloons served. The cook's voice echoes in your memory, gravelly and amused. Stew's what keeps him alive, but it's the sides that make smile. Asides, right? You wander around to the back of the saloon, where the kitchen's smoke drifts up from a blackened stove. Inside, the cook's already working on tomorrow's biscuits. You watch through the window as he rolls out dough with the bottom of a whiskey bottle, muttering softly like he's praying, or arguing with the flour. Biscuits were the backbone of the frontier diet. You can almost hear the voice of some historian whispering it in your head. Leavened or not, biscuits were as essential as boots. They were quick, cheap, and forgiving. All you needed was flour, lard, salt, and a splash of sour milk, or plain water if that's all you had. He cuts them with a tin can, slides them onto a baking pan that's seen more bullets than polish, and drops it into the fire's edge. The smell, even from outside, is enough to make your heart soften like butter on a hot biscuit. You can almost taste it already. Flaky, smoky, just a little gritty from the ash that inevitably sneaks in. Frontier seasoning, they called it. Mainstream historical fact. Biscuits were often made without yeast or baking powder, because those luxuries didn't travel well. Instead, cowboys used sourdough starter or saleratus, a primitive baking soda that sometimes tasted faintly metallic. But hey, when you've been on the trail for 6 weeks, even metallic bread feels like heaven. You picture yourself sitting back inside the saloon, a plate of those biscuits next to your bowl of slumgullion. You crack one open. Steam curls out like a sigh. You smear it with a dollop of something, maybe gravy, maybe molasses, maybe pure courage, and take a bite. For a moment, you forget about the dust and the loneliness and the blisters. You just sit there, chewing contentment. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some saloons in the more civilized territories actually served oyster crackers with stew.
Oysters! In the desert!
Historians still argue whether this was a symbol of refinement or insanity. You imagine a mustached gentleman in a bowler hat claiming, "Imported from the coast, sir," as he serves oysters that have traveled 200 miles in questionable ice. By the time they reached Arizona, those oysters had probably achieved enlightenment. But the cowboys didn't care. It wasn't about taste. It was about status. You eat oysters in the Wild West, and suddenly, you're not just surviving. You're someone. You step inside again, drawn by the smell of something frying. The cook's at it again, dropping dough balls into sizzling lard. The scent is pure nostalgia. "Corn fritters," he says proudly. "Ain't no stew without 'em." You nod, pretending you know what he's talking about, but the first bite makes it clear. Sweet corn, crunchy edges, soft middle, a miracle in golden brown. You close your eyes and let it melt. He laughs. "See, that's the trick. You fry 'em in bacon grease, not oil. Gives 'em soul." You grin. "Heart attack in a bite," he winks. "Better to die happy." Historians still argue whether fried sides like corn fritters, salt pork, and biscuits were standard in saloons or only offered in wealthier establishments. Some records show that smaller frontier towns survived on bread crusts and jerky, while the booming cities like Dodge and Deadwood could afford full spreads: beans, biscuits, pickles, even pies. Yes, pies. You almost laugh at the thought. Imagine being 1,000 miles from the nearest apple tree, and someone offers you a slice of pie. It's a miracle disguised as dessert. There's a woman in the corner of the saloon now. A rare sight in this dusty den. She's behind the counter, slicing what looks suspiciously like a pie with a hunting knife. You drift closer, curiosity leading the way. "Apple?" you ask, hopefully. She snorts. Dried apple, sugar borrowed from the general store, and crust made from bacon fat. You grin. Sounds perfect. She hands you a slice. The crust flakes under your fork, the filling sticky and sweet, with just a hint of smoke from the oven's wood. It tastes like memory, like something that's trying really hard to be home. You realize this is the closest anyone out here gets to comfort food. Mainstream historical fact again, dried fruit pies were common saloon fare because they kept well and didn't need refrigeration. Mince pies, apple, and peach were the top choices, using preserved fillings stretched with whatever sugar or syrup was available. When sugar ran out, molasses or even sorghum syrup did the job. Quirky tidbit. Some saloon owners charged extra for a pie slice, if it came with a clean fork. Reusing utensils between customers was common. Cleaning was optional. You glance at your fork now, and it's definitely seen things. But you're too far gone into the sugar haze to care. You lean back, sipping the last of your coffee. It's thick and black, the kind that could probably dissolve a nail. Cowboy coffee. They called it. Boiled grounds. No filter, sometimes a pinch of salt to cut the bitterness. The cook says, if your spoon stands up in it, you're doing it right. You test it. It does. You decide not to drink it too fast. Historians still argue whether cowboy coffee was as awful as travelers claimed, or just misunderstood. Some say it was strong but pure, the essence of caffeine and dust. Others describe it as liquid punishment. Either way, it fueled the frontier, one tin cup at a time. You can't help smiling. Out here, taste wasn't the point. The point was warmth, fullness, and the illusion that maybe tomorrow would taste just a little better. The night deepens. The saloon hums with quiet satisfaction. Empty bowls, crumb-filled plates, and half-drained mugs scatter across the tables like proof of survival. You look at your hands, dusty, tired, steady, and feel something rarer gratitude. The cook yawns, wipes his hands on his apron, and says softly, "You eat enough nights like this. You stop missing home so much." You nod. You believe him. The desert outside may still be endless, but for now, you've found a little warmth inside it. A small, stubborn corner of the world where stew, biscuits, and burned coffee mean you're still here. And maybe that's all the comfort a soul needs under a Wild West sky. By the next morning, the smell of the saloon's kitchen changes again. Gone are the sweet hints of biscuit dough and corn fritter grease. Now the air carries something sharper, smoked, peppered, and slightly burnt, like a campfire after a storm. You step inside to find the cook already at work, sleeves rolled up, knife flashing in the dim light. On the counter, he's slicing long strips of meat, lean dry, and tough enough to break a tooth. The sight alone makes your jaw ache. "Breakfast," he says flatly, holding up a strip like a prize catch. "Jerky." You blink. "That's breakfast." He grins. "It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you're broke." You sit down at one of the rough, hewn tables as he tosses you a piece. It hits the wood with a thud. You pick it up, sniff it, and bite down carefully. The taste hits like lightning. Salt, smoke, and iron. It's chewy, almost leathery. But there's something satisfying in the resistance. Each bite is a reminder that this isn't soft living. It's endurance. Cowboys called jerky the pocket meal. It didn't spoil, didn't need cooking, and weighed next to nothing. You could ride all day, with a few strips tucked into your saddlebag, and know you'd make it through another sunset. Mainstream historical fact. Jerky wasn't a cowboy invention. Native American tribes had been drying and smoking meat for centuries before settlers ever rode the plains. The word, jerky, itself comes from the Quechua word charqui, meaning dried meat. The practice traveled north through trade routes long before cowboys made it famous. You imagine those early methods, thin cuts of venison or buffalo, hung high over smoky fires, dried by wind and sun. No salt mines, no preservatives, just time and patience. Then came the settlers, who brought barrels of salt and new ways to ruin everything. They packed beef in brine, smoked it over mesquite, and chewed through history one tough bite at a time. The cook eyes you chewing with quiet amusement. "Careful," he says. "That stuff's older than my sense of humor." You laugh through a mouthful. "You sure this isn't saddle leather?" He shrugs. "Hard to tell before coffee." You both know it's only half a joke. In the corner, a prospector gnaws on a piece so hard you're convinced he's sharpening his teeth. He washes it down with whiskey, coughs, and mutters, "Best I had all week." The bartender raises an eyebrow. "You say that every day." "That's 'cause it's true every day," the prospector replies. That earns a laugh from the whole room, the kind of laugh that makes the dust dance in the morning light. Quirky tidbit time. Jerky wasn't just beef. Oh no, the frontier was far more experimental. Deer, elk, antelope, turkey, sure. But some records mention prairie dog and even rattlesnake jerky. The saloon cook swears he once made coyote strips. You can't tell if he's joking, and you don't really want to know. Still, the logic holds. Out here, meat was meat. If it could be hunted and dried, it had potential, and historians still argue whether those alternative jerkies were acts of desperation or culinary curiosity. Maybe both. The frontier wasn't a place of absolutes. It was improvisation with a knife. The cook sets another batch on the counter. You watch him sprinkle coarse salt and cracked pepper, rubbing it in with the care of a craftsman. "You dry it too quick," he says, "and it rots. Too slow, and the flies get it." there's a balance. Same with people, I reckon. You nod. You've met enough travelers out here to know he's right. Some burned out fast, chasing gold and glory. Others rotted in their own bitterness. But the ones who lasted, the ones who survived, they were like jerky. Weathered, resilient, salty, but still good. As the morning drags on, more townsfolk drift in. The place fills with the steady murmur of chewing and small talk. A few folks dip their jerky into tin mugs of coffee, softening it enough to chew without breaking teeth. You try it. The coffee adds bitterness, a strange harmony of smoke and caffeine. You decide it's not bad, just assertive. The piano player yawns awake, squinting at the sunlight cutting through the saloon's dusty windows. "We still serving leather this morning," he calls. "Jerky," the cook corrects. "Same difference?" The pianist grumbles. The cook grins. "Play something sweet then. Maybe it'll tenderize it." Historians still argue whether jerky was primarily trail food or saloon fare. Most agree it started on the range, where cattlemen needed protein that could survive a Texas summer. But some saloons sold it by the pound behind the counter, wrapped in brown paper like candy. It was the original grab and go snack, protein bars of the 19th century, minus the marketing. There were even stories of card players using jerky as currency. "I'll see your bet," one might say, tossing a strip into the pot, "and raise you 2 bites." You imagine that scene now. Whiskey, cards, laughter, and a pile of meat chips sitting next to the winnings. Civilization's wildest poker night. The cook gestures to the corner where strips hang drying above the stove. "Keep 'em there long enough. They'll last through a winter," he says. "Or a war," you nod. It's food as a philosophy. Not pretty, not gentle, but enduring. Like the land itself. He tosses you a fresh piece. It's still warm, soft or smoky. You take a bite and finally taste the balance. Salt and patience, hardship and humor. "You learn something eating this stuff," the cook says. "What's that?" "That survival don't have to taste good. It just has to work." Outside, the morning brightens. Dust swirls in the sun, and the smell of smoke clings to your clothes. You tuck a few jerky strips into your coat pocket before heading out. You can almost hear the west whispering as you walk down the street. The dry wind carrying the stories of 1,000 forgotten meals. Meals that weren't about luxury, but about life. You pause at the edge of town and glance back at the saloon. From here, it looks small, almost fragile against the horizon. But inside those walls, there's warmth, noise, and food, if you can call it that has kept the wilderness at bay for decades. You take another bite of jerky, chew slowly, and let the salt sting your tongue. The taste is rough but honest. And as the sun climbs higher, you realize that out here, even a strip of dried meat can feel like a feast, because it means you've got one more day to ride. The cook's words echo faintly as the wind rises. "Balance, kid. That's the trick. Too quick, too slow, you lose it." You think about that long after the saloon disappears behind you, because in the Wild West, everything, meat, men, and meaning, had to be dried just right. The afternoon sun bakes the street, turning every board, wagon wheel, and horsey-hide saddle into a heat trap. Dust swirls in lazy spirals, catching the light and making the world look almost magical. If your definition of magic includes dehydration and sunburn. You pause outside the saloon, wiping sweat from your brow, and glance at the menu of the day. Mostly whatever the cook decides to throw into a pot. But there's more to Wild West food than breakfast and jerky. Lunch, or whatever passed for it, often included the overlooked hero of frontier sustenance, the humble sandwich. Not your delicate, artisanal kind with microgreens and avocado, no. These were slabs of bread piled high with whatever meat, cheese, or mystery filling you could scrounge. The bartender slides you a plate, between 2 rough slices of bread, There's a hunk of corned beef, a smear of mustard, and a slice of something resembling cheese. You bite. It's dense, chewy, and satisfying. The bread is stale, but that's intentional. Less chance for mold in the summer heat. Historians still argue whether sandwiches were a frontier invention or simply a practical adaptation of Eastern eating habits. Some letters from miners mention meat between bread as early as the 1850s, while cattle drivers likely ate them on the go, wrapped in cloth or paper for convenience. Whatever the origin, sandwiches were portable, filling, and could survive a hot day without refrigeration. A quirky tidbit: some saloons added an unusual ingredient to their sandwiches: pickled eggs. Yes, eggs boiled and soaked in vinegar for days. They were tangy, salty, and, if you were brave, occasionally included in a slab of corned beef. Imagine biting into a sandwich and getting a sharp egg surprise. It was considered a delicacy by some, a hazard by others. You nibble cautiously, wondering if the pickled egg will make a cameo. It doesn't. For now, you're safe. The street outside is alive with the usual suspects: cowboys dragging their boots through dust, miners counting coins with shaky hands, and women carrying baskets of laundry and gossip. Children run past, barefoot and reckless, laughing in a way that's almost musical. Their joy contrasts sharply with the gritty meals inside, reminding you that life here was a blend of survival and stolen pleasures. You return to the saloon, taking a seat by the window. The cook is busy behind the stove, tossing bread into the fire to toast it. The smell is irresistible. Crunchy, smoky, slightly charred, the kind of bread that would make a city baker cry. He drops a hunk of toasted bread in front of you. Open-faced. Add your meat, he instructs. You do, and the corned beef sandwich transforms instantly, hot and savory. Bread absorbing just enough fat to make it worth every bite. It's simple, functional, but oddly comforting. Mainstream historical fact: open-faced sandwiches were common in saloons and working camps. They allowed workers to add toppings sparingly and eat quickly without making a mess. Some plates were shared, and sometimes a single slice of bread supported multiple layers of meat, cheese, and condiments. It was practical ingenuity, food that adapted to the harsh conditions of the frontier. Another quirky tidbit: there are records of sandwiches made with fried onions, smoked sausage, and even leftover chili poured directly over the top. Imagine eating that at the poker table, the juices dripping onto your hands while your opponent tries not to stare. It was messy, loud, and delicious, a reflection of the West itself. You lean back, savoring the sandwich and the rare calm. The room hums with quiet conversation, the piano faintly playing in the background. The smell of cornbread from a nearby pan mingles with coffee and smoke. Somehow, this chaos forms a kind of symphony, rough, unpolished, but satisfying in its authenticity. The bartender refills your cup with coffee, dark enough to strip paint, and you take a slow sip. The bitterness balances the richness of the corned beef, giving your taste buds a strange kind of approval. Historians still argue whether sandwiches were eaten more for convenience or nutrition. Some suggest they were a symbol of efficiency on the trail. Others argue they were a luxury compared to the usual beans and jerky. Either way, they became a staple in frontier life, a brief nod to comfort in a harsh, unpredictable world. You glance around and notice a man at the corner table, balancing a slice of bread on his knee while reading a tattered newspaper. He eats slowly, methodically, as if savoring not just the food, but the stability it represents. You recognize the same reverence in your own actions. Bit by bit, appreciating sustenance as more than calories, but as survival, ritual, and history rolled into one edible package. A woman walks past with a basket of pickles, offering a curious smile. Out here, even condiments were precious. Vinegar, salt, and cabbage could turn a meal from bland to miraculous. You reach for a jar, tasting a slice of cucumber that's sharp, sour, and almost shocking after the richness of the sandwich. Quirky tidbit. Pickles were sometimes traded for whiskey or meat. Saloon owners kept them for emergencies, bartering one sour slice for $1 or a favor. Some towns even had pickle wars, small disputes over the last jar in town. You can almost hear the cries of desperate men, waving cucumbers like banners of hope. The cook wipes his hands on his apron and mutters about dinner prep. "Stew again," he says, shaking his head. "But tomorrow, maybe something new." You nod. You've learned that new is relative. Out here, it could mean anything from a slightly different stew to a hunk of dried fish in your sandwich. And somehow, that's exciting. Because in the Wild West, even the simplest meal is an adventure. You finish your sandwich, sip the last of your coffee, and step back onto the dusty street. The sun beats down, relentless as ever, but you feel a little fortified. Your stomach is full, your spirits lifted, and your mind is quietly impressed by the ingenuity of survival. And somewhere, in the haze of the afternoon, you realize that frontier food isn't just about eating. It's about learning to appreciate the smallest comforts, the little rituals, and the bravery it takes just to chew through another day. By mid-afternoon, the saloon begins to fill again, though not with the predictable breakfast crowd. This is the time when travelers, cowhands, and occasional gamblers wander in, looking for a drink, a bite, or sometimes just a place to rest their aching feet. You trudge in, boots kicking up dust, and the familiar scents greet you: coffee, burnt wood, and the faintest hint of yesterday's stew lingering in the corners. The cook is behind the stove, flipping pancakes. Not delicate ones, the kind you see in glossy magazines, but thick, rough, and golden brown. They smell like comfort itself. You sit at your usual spot, feeling the warmth radiate from the cast iron griddle. Hungry, the cook asks without looking up. "Starving," you reply, though your stomach is already loyal from the morning's jerky and lunch sandwich. You know what he means. These pancakes aren't just breakfast, they're a statement. A claim that the day is still survivable. Mainstream historical fact, pancakes were a common frontier breakfast, often made from whatever flour was available. Some recipes added eggs, milk, or even cornmeal when available. Simplicity was key. Mix, fry, eat. Cowboys often cooked them over open fires on cattle drives, and cooks in saloons adapted the method for griddles indoors. Historians still argue whether pancakes were more popular in mining towns or ranching settlements. Some letters suggest miners loved them for their filling qualities, while ranchers preferred the quicker biscuit and gravy option. Either way, pancakes became a symbol of flexibility in frontier cooking. You bite into one. The texture is rugged, the edges slightly crisp, and the inside soft, though your teeth have to work for it. There's something about the simple act of chewing that feels profound. Outside, the wind rattles the saloon windows, whispering across the street. But inside, everything is warm and constant. The bartender slides over a tin cup of coffee, steam curling in lazy swirls. You take a sip, letting the bitterness contrast the sweetness of the pancake. It's a marriage of extremes, and somehow it works. Quirky tidbit. Some saloons served pancakes with unexpected toppings. Maple syrup was rare and expensive, but molasses, fruit preserves, and even a smear of lard were common. A traveler's diary mentions a pancake with gravy and pickles. And while it sounds bizarre, frontier palates apparently approved. The more extreme the combination, the better the story. You nibble another bite, thinking about that pickled pancake possibility. Somehow, you're not entirely disgusted. Out here, rules are suggestions. The room hums with life. Miners compare nugget sizes, cowboys boast of long rides, and gamblers lean over card tables, eyeing each other with suspicion and amusement. A woman at the bar whispers to her companion about the new shipment of dried beans which could last a month if rationed. Beans. You shake your head and grin. They may not be glamorous, but they're reliable. Beans were the unsung heroes of the West. Cooked over open fires, or in cast iron pots, they provided protein, fiber, and a sense of security. And when combined with salt pork or bacon, they became a meal that could sustain a man through long days on horseback. Historians still argue whether beans were more vital than jerky or bread, and the debate is ongoing. Some claim they were the lifeblood of the frontier diet. Others insist they were merely filler. You glance at the cook as he flips another pancake. He hums a tune, lips barely moving. There's pride in his movements, a subtle artfulness in the way he seasons and flips. Out here, presentation isn't everything, but care shows through in small gestures. A miner waves at you, holding a tin of beans. "Try these with a little salt pork," he says. You do. The combination is earthy, smoky, and surprisingly comforting. Somehow, the beans taste of resilience, of hard work, of a land that doesn't give anything for free. Quirky tidbit. Frontier cooks sometimes added crushed coffee grounds to bean pots, believing it improved flavor or helped preserve the dish. You try to imagine that taste. Bitter beans with a coffee kick. The concept makes you smirk, though you can't deny some resourcefulness there. Outside, the sun has begun to dip, turning the sky into streaks of pink and gold. Inside, the saloon warms with activity. Children run in from errands, dusty and laughing. Travelers find a table and unpack their sparse provisions. The cook flips pancakes with rhythm, unbothered by the chaos around him. You take a slow bite of the last pancake, savoring the sweet and savory contrast, the history pressed into every rough edge. The coffee warms you further, a necessary complement to the rugged meal. A piano chord strikes, off-key, but charming. You watch the room's occupants interact. A microcosm of frontier society, held together by simple sustenance, shared moments, and the collective hum of survival. Historians still argue whether meals like this, pancakes, beans, jerky, shaped social hierarchies in the West, or merely reflected them. Either way, eating together, even in a rough saloon, was a form of community, a brief respite from the isolation of the open plains. You swallow the last bite, lean back, and exhale. The pancake is gone, but the warmth remains. The satisfaction of nourishment, and the quiet realization that these simple foods carried more than calories. They carried culture, history, and connection. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the scent of dust and mesquite smoke. You step onto the porch, feeling full, content, and strangely at peace. Another day, another meal, another story in the endless saga of Wild West sustenance. Evening settles over the town like a thick, dusty blanket. You step back into the saloon, boots tapping softly on the worn floorboards. The room is dim now, the sunlight long gone, replaced by the flickering glow of oil lamps. Shadows stretch across the walls, curling around tables and chairs like lazy cats. The smell of cooking hangs in the air, mingled with smoke, sweat, and the faint tang of whiskey. Dinner is underway, though in this part of the West, dinner is a flexible concept. You find a spot near the stove, where the cook is stirring a large pot, steam rising in ghostly swirls. He glances up, nods, and continues working. Tonight's menu is beans and cornbread, a staple in frontier fare, paired with salted pork for the lucky ones. You scoop a spoonful, the aroma strong and earthy. The beans are tender, the salt pork slightly crisp, and the cornbread golden with a crumbly top. You taste it slowly, letting each bite settle in. There's a rhythm to this meal, comforting in its consistency, the kind that lets you forget the dusty plains outside, even if only for a moment. Mainstream historical fact. Beans and cornbread were a fundamental frontier combination. Cornbread could be baked over a hearth or fried in a pan, while beans provided a reliable source of protein and fiber. This pairing was economical, hearty, and could feed a large group with minimal effort. A practical necessity for saloons, cowhands, and mining camps alike. Historians still argue whether cornbread was more common baked in a pan or cooked directly in the ashes of a fire. The truth is likely both, depending on available tools and ingenuity. You notice other patrons in the saloon cowhans, wiping their mouths with rough cloths, miners counting coins after a day of toil, women quietly chatting about gossip or provisions. Each plate reflects the same story, a meal designed for survival, seasoned with whatever the land provides. A quirky tidbit in some towns, saloons served cornbread with unexpected additions like dried fruit or chili flakes. There's even a report from a traveling merchant describing cornbread, studded with pieces of smoked rattlesnake, which you choose to file under frontier curiosity. The cook ladles beans and pork onto your plate, his hands steady, practiced. You dig in, the mixture warming your insides. Each bite is a reminder of why this simple combination endured through decades: reliability, nourishment, and a hint of flavor that could make even a grueling day slightly more bearable. Outside, the wind rattles the saloon sign, a reminder of the untamed world waiting beyond these walls. Inside, laughter and conversation create a sense of community, fleeting but essential. You pause between bites, taking in the scene. The off-key piano playing softly in the corner, the quiet scrape of chairs, the occasional chuckle from a gambler counting his coins. Mainstream historical fact: salted pork, often combined with beans, was a critical protein source in the 19th century West. It could be preserved for long periods, making it ideal for long cattle drives, mining camps, and isolated settlements. Quirky tidbits: some cooks experimented by adding coffee grounds or molasses to their bean pots, believing it enhanced flavor or helped preserve the dish. Modern palates might shudder, but frontier resourcefulness demanded boldness. Historians still argue whether these flavor additions were truly beneficial or simply a desperate attempt to mask bland ingredients. Either way, they reflect the creativity and improvisation required to thrive in a harsh environment. You lean back, wiping your hands on a cloth, savoring the last few bites. There's satisfaction here, not luxury, but the quiet triumph of survival. The rhythm of eating, sipping coffee, and observing the room forms a comforting pattern, a small anchor in the unpredictable life outside. The piano stutters a few notes, then finds its rhythm. A miner murmurs a soft tune under his breath, matching the tempo. The cook hums, spoon in hand, stirring the pot as if it holds secrets you're not ready to hear. You glance at the salted pork. Crispy edges, tender interior, and a flavor that tastes like a reward for perseverance. Beans provide balance, cornbread rounds it out, and together, the trio becomes more than food. It becomes ritual. Historians still argue whether communal meals in saloons fostered cooperation among cowhands or merely reinforced hierarchy. Some suggest the act of sharing food built trust and camaraderie, while others believe it highlighted differences in status, wealth, and skill. You take another sip of coffee, letting its bitterness contrast the rich flavors of your plate. Outside, the desert night whispers, but inside, the saloon remains a haven of warmth, sustenance, and human connection. By the time you finish your meal, night has fully settled, and the saloon's occupants are content, their bellies full and spirits steadied. You rise slowly, feeling the quiet weight of satisfaction. For all its simplicity, this meal has accomplished what the Wild West demanded. It has kept people alive, connected, and, in its own way, hopeful. You step back onto the porch, the cool night air a balm against the lingering heat of the day. Somewhere, a horse whinnies, and you hear the distant call of coyotes. Survival continues beyond the walls of the saloon, but for now, you're fortified. Night deepens, and the saloon settles into a familiar rhythm. The low hum of conversation, the scrape of chairs, and the occasional laughter blend with the flickering lantern light, casting dancing shadows across the walls. You take a seat near the stove, your elbows resting on the rough, hewn table, and watch the cook move with the ease of someone who has been doing this his whole life. Tonight's meal is stew once more, but not the morning kind or the trail jerky. This is a beef and vegetable concoction simmered long enough to meld flavors into something almost civilized. You sniff the steam rising from the pot. It's hearty, earthy, and faintly peppered, promising warmth and sustenance. Mainstream historical fact: beef stew was a staple in saloons and frontier households alike. Slow, cooked over a fire or stove, it could stretch limited ingredients to feed many people. Vegetables were added when available: onions, carrots, potatoes, and salt or fat provided flavor and preservation. Historians still argue whether the standard beef stew recipe was common in all frontier regions or adapted based on local availability. Some diaries suggest more creativity in mining towns, while ranching communities preferred consistency over flair. You scoop a spoonful, the liquid thick and rich, meat tender and vegetables soft. The flavors hit your tongue with a kind of nostalgic precision. There's comfort here, not luxury, but the satisfaction of nourishment earned through simple preparation and patience. A quirky tidbit: some cooks added coffee grounds or a splash of whiskey to their stew to enhance flavor, or at least to impress patrons. Travelers' letters mention tasting stews with surprising smokiness, a hint of bitterness, or even an unexpected kick from alcohol. You're careful, spoon poised. Tonight, it's straightforward, but the potential for eccentricity remains. The saloon is quiet, but for the sounds of eating and the occasional piano note, hesitant and off-key. A prospector murmurs a story about a lost claim while chewing slowly, the words punctuated by the crunch of his bread soaked in stew. You listen, nodding, letting the narrative flow around you like the steam rising from your bowl. Mainstream historical fact: bread with stew was a common pairing. Slices of coarse, often stale bread served both as utensils and fillers, soaking up the rich liquid. Open-faced sandwiches made from leftover stew were a popular second meal, minimizing waste and maximizing caloric intake. Quirky tidbit: frontier cooks occasionally tossed in whatever protein they had on hand. Even rabbits, squirrels, or the occasional unidentifiable meat. Patrons either accepted it as necessity or complained quietly, knowing that survival often outweighed gourmet preference. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of less conventional meats reflected scarcity or experimentation. Some accounts praise it as ingenious, others as desperation masked by culinary bravado. You take another spoonful. The stew coats your mouth with warmth, and for a brief moment, the harshness of the desert outside feels distant. The saloon hums with quiet camaraderie. Strangers share stories, laughter, and food, forming a temporary community against the vast, indifferent wilderness. A woman at the corner table tips her cup of coffee toward a traveling man, offering him a slice of bread to dip into his stew. Small gestures like this repeat throughout the room, creating connections as much as the food itself. You glance at the cook, who wipes his hands on a flour-dusted apron. "Stew's not fancy," he says, "but it keeps him coming back." You nod in agreement. Indeed, it's more than nourishment. It's ritual, tradition, and survival all in one thick, fragrant pot. Outside, the desert wind whispers against the saloon walls. Inside, you feel a sense of grounding. Meals like this, simple, hearty, unpretentious, anchor you to a world that is otherwise unpredictable, harsh, and vast. Mainstream historical fact: shared meals in saloons played a vital social role. They weren't just about eating. They offered a sense of community, a space where stories were exchanged and alliances quietly formed. Patrons of all types, cowhands, miners, merchants, gathered around the same tables, their shared sustenance fostering bonds of trust, respect, or at least temporary tolerance. Quirky tidbit. Some saloons held mystery stew, nights where diners were encouraged to guess the ingredients. Success earned applause, failure earned laughter. Historians still debate whether this was a marketing gimmick or simply frontier humor. The night stretches on. You finish your stew, savoring the last spoonful and the quiet intimacy of the room. The warmth in your belly is comforting, almost meditative. Outside, coyotes call. Wind sweeps through the streets, and the stars glitter like scattered coins above. Inside, the saloon remains a sanctuary of food, stories, and human resilience. You lean back, reflecting on the meals you've experienced today: pancakes for breakfast, jerky and sandwiches for lunch, beans and cornbread for dinner, and now this rich stew. Each dish tells a story of necessity, improvisation, and survival. Each carries the flavor of history, the taste of a world that demanded adaptability and creativity at every bite. And as the piano player drifts off to a soft lullaby, you realize that the Wild West may be harsh and untamed, but inside its saloons, there's warmth, sustenance, and a strange, comforting humanity that binds everyone together. The saloon begins to quiet down, but the kitchen still hums with activity. You watch the cook pull a large iron skillet from the stove, its edges darkened with years of use. Tonight's focus shifts from stew to a new frontier staple: fried chicken. Not the tender, golden, brown perfection you might imagine from a modern diner, but the rustic, hearty kind that defines survival on the plains. The chicken sizzles in hot lard, sending tiny pops into the air, and a rich aroma that immediately draws the attention of anyone within sniffing distance. You take a deep breath. There's something primal about this smell: warmth, fat, and the promise of nourishment rolled into one. Mainstream historical fact: fried chicken was a common frontier meal, often cooked in cast iron skillets over open flames. It was popular because chickens were relatively easy to raise and slaughter, and frying helped preserve the meat's juices, making it more palatable and filling for hungry travelers or laborers. Historians still argue whether fried chicken became widely popular due to Southern influence, or if it independently evolved on the frontier as a practical method of cooking poultry. Likely, both factors contributed to its prevalence. You reach for a piece, feeling the heat radiate through the skin. You bite down carefully. The outside is crisp and slightly charred, the inside tender and savory, releasing a smoky aroma that seems to echo the desert itself. There's a rhythm to the chewing, the way you savor each bite like it's a rare luxury. Out here, even fried chicken is a hard, earned pleasure. A quirky tidbit: some frontier cooks coated chicken in whatever flour or grain they had on hand, sometimes mixing in cornmeal or even coffee grounds for texture or flavor. Letters from travelers describe these experiments as bold or questionable, but frontier palates were surprisingly adaptable. Across the room, a miner whispers about catching rabbits and adding them to tonight's stew. You chuckle quietly, thinking of the fried chicken sizzling nearby. The contrast is stark: one meal born of comfort and familiarity, the other born of necessity and resourcefulness. And yet, both sustain, both nourish, both tell the same story of survival. The cook slides a piece onto your plate. You take it gratefully, the edges still steaming. The saloon is quieter now, the piano playing soft background chords, the flickering lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The moment feels almost sacred, a pause between the chaos of the frontier and the hard work still waiting outside. Mainstream historical fact: frying was often reserved for special occasions or meals for guests, as it required more fat and attention than simpler methods like boiling or roasting. Yet the reward, crispy skin, tender meat, was unmatched. Cowboys and travelers often prized these meals, savoring them as a rare comfort amid harsh conditions. Historians still argue whether frontier fried chicken was a daily staple or a once in a while indulgence. Diaries and letters provide clues, but nothing definitive. Likely, its frequency depended on access to ingredients and cooking equipment. You dip a piece into a small bowl of gravy, a concoction of pan drippings, flour, and water. It's a simple mix, but it transforms the flavor, adding richness and depth. Every bite feels intentional, a combination of necessity, ingenuity, and a little luck. Quirky tidbit in some saloons. Fried chicken was paired with unexpected accompaniments, like pickled vegetables or molasses. Patrons either loved the tangy, sweet combination or shook their heads, but experimentation was part of frontier charm. Historians still debate whether these pairings were common or anecdotal extremes. You glance around. The saloon's occupants, though fewer in number now, enjoy their meals with quiet satisfaction. Conversations are subdued, laughter occasional. There's an unspoken understanding here. The food sustains, but it also brings a measure of connection in an otherwise isolated world. The cook leans against the counter, hands crossed, watching everyone with the pride of someone who knows their labor feeds not just bodies but spirits. Eat slow, he mutters, almost to himself. Out here, that's an art. You finish the last bite of chicken, savoring the rich, smoky flavor lingering on your tongue. You sip coffee, thick and bitter, washing down the meal. The saloon, with its flickering lamps, off-key piano, and low murmurs, feels like a small sanctuary from the vast, unforgiving desert outside. Mainstream historical fact: fried chicken, like other frontier meals, symbolized a rare indulgence and a respite from the monotony of beans, jerky, and bread. It was as much psychological sustenance as physical nourishment. Quirky tidbit: frontier cooks sometimes served fried chicken with a sprinkle of hot chili powder or smoked paprika, creating an early version of spicy chicken that would make modern enthusiasts proud. Historians still argue whether these spices were common or rare luxury imports. As you lean back, feeling the warmth of a full belly, you realize that each meal you've experienced in this saloon, pancakes, jerky, sandwiches, beans, cornbread, and now fried chicken, tells the same story: survival, ingenuity, and the human need for comfort. Even in the harshest environments, people found ways to create nourishment that was practical, flavorful, and occasionally daring. Outside, the night whispers through the town, soft and steady. Inside, the saloon glows with life, stories, and the lingering aroma of fried chicken. A small testament to humanity's enduring resourcefulness in the face of adversity. The night grows quieter, and you find yourself lingering near the saloon's back table, watching the last of the patrons finish their meals. A few tired cowans rest their hats on their knees, the smell of fried chicken and stew clinging faintly to their coats. Outside, the desert air is cool now, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and mesquite smoke. Inside, warmth and the faint hum of conversation make the room feel like a fragile oasis. Tonight, the cook prepares one of the frontier's lesser-known delicacies: stew with dumplings. Not the fluffy, pillowy kind of modern imagination, but rough, heartily dropped into a bubbling pot, thickening the broth, and giving each bite a chewiness that feels like survival incarnate. You scoop a spoonful, the dumpling soft yet substantial, absorbing the rich flavor of meat and vegetables. Mainstream historical fact: dumplings were a practical addition to frontier stews. Made from flour and water, sometimes with a bit of fat, they stretched meals and provided extra calories. They were quick to prepare and versatile, filling the gaps in the diet when protein or vegetables were limited. Historians still argue whether dumplings were more commonly eaten by settlers or brought westward by immigrants who adapted European recipes to frontier conditions. Both origins likely contributed to their popularity. A quirky tidbit: some cooks experimented by adding cornmeal, coffee grounds, or even bits of jerky into dumplings. The results were unpredictable, ranging from surprisingly delicious to chewy enough to damage a molar. Frontier palates were surprisingly forgiving, or desperate. You bite into one, savoring its warmth and density. The combination of meat, broth, and dough is oddly comforting. A reminder that ingenuity can make even the simplest ingredients feel luxurious. The piano hums softly in the corner, a gentle accompaniment to the scrape of spoons and soft conversation. A miner mutters to his companion about trapping rabbits to add to next week's stew, and you smile at the continuity. Yesterday's improvisation becomes tomorrow's routine. Mainstream historical fact. Frontier stews were often adapted based on availability. If fresh vegetables or meat weren't accessible, cooks relied on dried beans, root vegetables, or salted pork, ensuring that every pot fed as many mouths as possible. Historians still argue whether such adaptations were a necessity imposed by scarcity or a reflection of frontier ingenuity and taste. The cook glances up from the pot, wiping his hands on a flour-streaked apron. "Dumplings hold the broth," he says simply. "Without it's just soup." You nod, understanding the unspoken message's sustenance is about more than taste. It's about fullness, warmth, and survival. Quirky tidbit: some saloons used dumplings as a game. Patrons would try to guess what was hidden inside a chunk of beef, a piece of root vegetable, or sometimes an unexpected spice. Historians still debate whether this was playful entertainment or a subtle test of culinary bravery. You take another spoonful, feeling the hearty dough and rich stew fill you. Outside, the wind carries a distant coyote's call, but inside, the saloon feels safe, warm, and familiar. The room's patrons nod, smile, and sip coffee, all connected through the simple act of sharing food. The cook turns his attention to the next task: biscuits for tomorrow morning. You watch as he rolls the dough with the bottom of a bottle, patting and cutting with precision. There's a quiet artfulness to his movements, the rhythm of survival transformed into ritual. Mainstream historical fact. Biscuits were a staple of frontier diets because they were quick to prepare, required minimal ingredients, and could be stored for several days. They often accompanied stew, beans, or meat, serving as both food and utensil. Quirky tidbit: some frontier cooks experimented with stuffing biscuits with anything from dried fruit to bacon fat, creating an early version of the handheld snack. Historians still argue whether these innovations were regional specialties or sporadic experiments by inventive cooks. You take a final sip of coffee, letting its bitterness balance the richness of the dumplings. The saloon's quiet rhythm lulls you into reflection. Every meal, pancakes, jerky, sandwiches, beans, cornbread, fried chicken, stew with dumplings, tells the same story: adaptation, survival, and the human desire for comfort, even in the harshest environments. Outside, the desert night is expansive and indifferent, but inside, the saloon glows with life, nourishment, and the small, enduring triumph of ingenuity. You realize that frontier food isn't just about calories, it's about connection, tradition, and the subtle joy of making do with what's available. The saloon's atmosphere has shifted further into night. Lanterns flicker, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. The piano player hums softly, fingers hovering above the keys, hesitant but persistent. You settle into a chair near the hearth, the warmth seeping into your bones, and observe the rhythm of frontier life winding down. Tonight, the focus is on desserts, if you can call them that. Frontier sweets were rarely elaborate, often improvised from what was on hand. A small tray of molasses cookies rests on the counter, their edges dark and slightly sticky, and a few pieces of fried apple slices glint in a shallow pan of hot lard. The cook sets them in front of you. The smell is intoxicating, sweet, smoky, and earthy all at once. Mainstream historical fact: molasses and honey were common sweeteners in the frontier because sugar was expensive and less available. Simple cookies, cakes, or fried fruits were a way to provide a hint of indulgence without relying on imported ingredients. These treats often accompanied coffee, providing a rare contrast to the salt-heavy, protein-rich meals of the day. Historians still argue whether desserts were mainly reserved for special occasions or consumed more casually in saloons. Diaries suggest both were true, depending on region and prosperity. You bite into a molasses cookie. It's dense, sticky, and fragrant, carrying hints of ginger or nutmeg if the cook could spare them. Each chew releases the robust, smoky sweetness, a gentle counterpoint to the salty and hearty meals earlier. Somehow, even a small cookie feels like a victory after a day of survival. A quirky tidbit. Frontier cooks sometimes made mock pies, using crushed crackers, dried fruit, and whatever sweetener they had. The result was rustic and chewy, but surprisingly satisfying. Patrons often claimed these pies were as delicious as anything found in more settled towns. The piano begins a slow, uneven melody. You sip your coffee, savoring the contrast between bitter liquid and sweet cookie. Outside, the night hums with insects and the distant howl of coyotes, but inside, the saloon remains a haven of warmth, light, and subtle indulgence. Mainstream historical fact. Fried fruits and simple baked goods were often served in saloons as affordable desserts. Apples, berries, and other available fruits could be fried or stewed, occasionally sweetened with molasses, honey, or even maple syrup, if a traveling merchant had brought it. Historians still argue whether these sweets influenced modern American dessert traditions or remained isolated frontier innovations. Likely, both are true. You notice a miner offering a fried apple slice to a young girl who has wandered in from errands. Her eyes light up as she takes it carefully, savoring the sweetness. Moments like this, sharing, improvising, adapting, give life to the food beyond its nutritional purpose. It becomes a connector, a comfort, and a small indulgence in a challenging world. Quirky tidbit. Some frontier desserts were deliberately fortified with spirits like whiskey or rum. The goal was dual flavor and preservation. Children were often spared, but adults sometimes enjoyed a bite that carried a little extra warmth. Historians still debate whether this was primarily for taste or practicality. You take another bite of the molasses cookie, feeling the stickiness on your fingers and the warmth it brings. The combination of sugar, spice, and memory creates a subtle nostalgia, even though you've never lived here before. Each bite connects you to countless unknown bakers who, despite scarcity, found ways to make life sweeter. The cook wipes his hands on his apron, leaning back against the counter. "Desserts are small victories," he says, almost in passing. You nod. In this environment, every morsel that brings pleasure counts as a win. Survival alone is not enough, joy, even modest, matters too. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling the edges of the saloon sign. Inside, the piano hovers between notes, the room silent except for soft munching and gentle conversation. You savor the quiet companionship that these simple desserts have inspired. The subtle connections between strangers, united by warmth, sugar, and sustenance. Mainstream historical fact. Frontier desserts often symbolized community, hospitality, and adaptability. Even minimal ingredients could be transformed into treats, reflecting both ingenuity and the desire to maintain morale in tough conditions. Quirky tidbit. Some dessert experiments included adding leftover stew or beans into sweet breads. Patrons often claimed it was surprisingly palatable. Though modern sensibilities might balk, historians still argue whether such combinations were common practice or eccentric exceptions. As you finish the last crumb of your cookie, you sip the remaining coffee and take a deep breath. The saloon feels timeless, a place where survival and small indulgences coexist. The night outside is vast and silent, but within these walls, food, warmth, and quiet human connection hold the space together. You realize that every meal today, from pancakes to jerky, cornbread, fried chicken, dumplings, and molasses cookies, has a story. Each dish represents not just sustenance, but adaptation, ingenuity, and the subtle pursuit of comfort in an unforgiving land. The saloon now teeters on the edge of midnight. Lanterns flicker, shadows stretch longer, and the hum of conversation softens to gentle murmurs. You sink into your chair, feeling the warmth from the stove seep into your legs, a comforting anchor against the cool night outside. The piano player pauses, fingers hovering over the keys, then resumes with a slow, hesitant tune that seems to echo the rhythm of the desert beyond the walls. Tonight, the cook unveils a final frontier treat: cornbread pudding. Not the soft, custardy version of modern imagination, but a rugged concoction designed to use leftover cornbread, milk, and a hint of sugar or molasses. You watch as he slices a generous portion onto your plate. The aroma is sweet, earthy, and slightly smoky, simple yet alluring. Mainstream historical fact: cornbread pudding or casserole was a common method to repurpose leftover cornbread, stretching limited ingredients while still providing a satisfying, sweet finish to a meal. It demonstrates the resourcefulness of frontier cooks who valued both practicality and flavor. Historians still argue whether cornbread pudding was more prevalent in southern or western settlements, though letters and diaries suggest it was widely adapted in both regions. You take a bite, the texture firm but yielding, with pockets of soft cornbread soaked in a sweet, slightly spiced mixture. Each chew carries warmth and sustenance, the kind that fills both stomach and spirit. It's a dessert born from necessity, yet it has a comforting elegance that reminds you of home, or at least a frontier version of it. A quirky tidbit: some cooks added dried fruit, nuts, or even a splash of whiskey to the pudding. Modern tastes might raise an eyebrow, but the frontier palate embraced experimentation, and results often delighted. You glance around the saloon. A miner quietly dips a piece into his coffee, a ritual born of habit and necessity. Cowhands nod politely to one another over plates of pudding, while a woman at the bar savors hers slowly, eyes half closed in quiet pleasure. These small acts, shared meals, simple desserts, create a fleeting sense of community, fleeting yet meaningful in the isolated West. Mainstream historical fact: shared desserts in saloons were as much about community as they were about sustenance. Offering a sweet treat could ease tension, foster trust, and provide a momentary indulgence in otherwise harsh conditions. Historians still argue whether desserts were truly communal or consumed privately by wealthier patrons, but evidence suggests both occurred depending on circumstance. A quirky tidbit: frontier cooks sometimes used leftover stew or beans in cornbread pudding experiments. The results were reportedly either surprisingly edible or slightly alarming. Such ingenuity underscores the adaptability necessary for survival in isolated settlements. You savor another bite, the pudding warm against your tongue, the sweetness balancing the salty and smoky flavors you've experienced throughout the day. The piano hums a low accompaniment, the room wrapped in quiet contentment. The cook wipes his hands, surveying the room. "It's not fancy," he says, "but it keeps em coming." You nod knowingly. Here, sustenance is a mixture of practicality, creativity, and the rare comfort of familiarity. Each meal, each dish, each morsel carries the weight of necessity, but also the lightness of pleasure. Outside, the desert night stretches endlessly, silent except for distant coyote calls and rustling sagebrush. Inside, the saloon glows with life, warmth, and sustenance. Each dish you've sampled, pancakes, sandwiches, beans, cornbread, fried chicken stew, dumplings, molasses cookies, and now cornbread pudding, tells the same story: ingenuity, survival, and small victories in a vast and often unforgiving land. Historians still argue whether frontier desserts had a lasting influence on modern American cuisine, or remained isolated curiosities. Likely, both narratives hold truth. You finish the last bite, letting it settle with the warmth of coffee. The room feels timeless, a microcosm of survival, adaptation, and quiet human connection. The night outside is indifferent, but inside, the saloon stands as a testament to resilience, comfort, and the enduring human desire to make life sweeter, one improvised meal at a time. The saloon is nearly silent now, a hushed sanctuary against the vast, indifferent desert beyond its doors. The lanterns flicker faintly, their warm glow casting long, lazy shadows across the worn wooden floor. You sit back in your chair, letting the soft heat from the stove wrap around you like a blanket, and reflect on the day's culinary journey. Every meal, from early pancakes to jerky, sandwiches, beans, cornbread, fried chicken, stew, dumplings, molasses cookies, and cornbread pudding, has been a story, a lesson in survival, and a testament to ingenuity. The cook quietly sweeps the floor, humming a low tune that seems to echo the rhythm of frontier life. The piano, long since quieted, leaves only the occasional creak of a chair or the scrape of a broom. Outside, the wind whispers over the desert, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Inside, you feel the comforting weight of warmth, food, and community, even if temporary. Mainstream historical fact: frontier saloons served as both culinary and social hubs. Meals and treats, no matter how humble, offered sustenance, connection, and occasional indulgence, reflecting the resourcefulness and creativity of settlers, cowhands, miners, and travelers. Historians still argue whether saloon fare significantly influenced regional culinary traditions or remained confined to frontier necessity. Evidence suggests both, as dishes evolved with availability, trade, and local taste preferences. You lift the last cup of coffee, feeling its warmth counterbalance the cool night air drifting through the open doorway. The flavors linger, a subtle reminder that survival was not just about filling the stomach, but about savoring the small, hard-earned comforts of life on the frontier. A quirky tidbit: some frontier cooks preserved leftover meals by frying them into cakes or repurposing them in desserts. Beans, cornbread, and even bits of meat occasionally found new life as a snack or second meal, demonstrating a pragmatic creativity that modern kitchens rarely need. Historians still debate how common these practices truly were, but diary entries suggest they were appreciated, if occasionally surprising, solutions. You glance at the remaining patrons. Cowhands nod silently to each other over empty plates. Travelers pack their belongings for the night's journey. A woman quietly gathers the remnants of fried apples and molasses cookies, storing them for morning. These small actions, mundane yet deliberate, reflect a rhythm of life that balances survival, resourcefulness, and fleeting pleasure. Mainstream historical fact: food was often shared communally, and leftovers were rarely wasted. This created both practical sustenance and social bonds, as meals became opportunities for conversation, alliance, and community, even in the transient environment of the West. You take a slow breath, reflecting on how each meal has carried more than flavor. Pancakes offered warmth, jerky provided energy, sandwiches delivered convenience, beans and cornbread nourished, fried chicken delighted, stew and dumplings sustained, molasses cookies sweetened, and cornbread pudding transformed leftovers into comfort. Together, they represent a patchwork of survival, ingenuity, and the human desire to make life just a little more enjoyable. Quirky tidbit: frontier cooks sometimes spiced meals in unexpected ways, from adding chili to cornbread to incorporating coffee grounds into pudding, reflecting both the limitations and inventiveness of their ingredients. Historians still argue whether these flavors were widely appreciated or viewed as eccentric. You rise from your chair, stretching slightly, feeling the satisfying weight of a day well fed. Outside, the desert night stretches endlessly, silent and indifferent. Inside, the saloon hums with residual warmth, memory, and the subtle joy of shared meals. You realize that frontier food was never merely sustenance. It was ritual, creativity, and human connection woven together, a quiet triumph against a vast and challenging world. When down 300 words now, the pace slows. You let your thoughts drift, lingering on the textures, flavors, and warmth of the day's meals. The crackling of the stove is softer, the lanterns glow more gentle, and your own breathing begins to match the quiet rhythm of the room. Imagine each dish not just as food, but as a story. Pancakes kissed by fire, sandwiches layered with practicality, beans simmered with care, fried chicken crisped to perfection, stews bubbling with life, dumplings tender and filling, molasses cookies sweet and earthy, and cornbread pudding soft with warmth. Each bite carries the weight of ingenuity, necessity, and fleeting pleasure. The desert night hums faintly outside, a lullaby in wind and sand. You picture the saloon's walls, sturdy against the chill, and the small acts of kindness among its occupants, sharing bread, passing a slice of fried apple, offering coffee to a tired traveler. These gestures, small and deliberate, echo the human desire for connection, comfort, and community, even in the harshest conditions. As you settle further into your chair, allow the images of glowing lanterns, steaming plates, and laughter to fade gently. Remember the taste of salt and sweetness, the aroma of smoke and molasses, and the quiet satisfaction of having survived another day on the frontier. Feel the warmth of meals that sustained bodies and spirits, and let the calm, rhythmic pulse of the saloon lull you into a sense of ease. Now, dim the lights in your own room, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and carry this sense of quiet triumph into your rest. The Wild West sleeps, the desert whispers, and you, too, can drift into gentle slumber, full of the comfort that comes from nourishment, ingenuity, and the simplest human joys.